Hey, what's happening everyone? Cody Lefevre coming to you from Alma's Gym, the highest gym in North America. Today's video is going to be the second part in a series about a checklist, developing a lift checklist. The first video was the pre-lift checklist, developing everything up to the point to where you lift. Now, this is the point where you're during the lift checklist. We're going to go over a few pieces all pertaining to the deadlift. This is just an example for you to use so that you can develop your own checklist. These things should be personalized so that you can keep them true to your form, whatever lift that you're working on that day. It doesn't have to be standardized across all lifts. So refine a checklist that you can have apply to your lift, and you could do it consistently. That way you're taking out variables from your lifts and you're making them more consistent, and that way you get stronger. So this is the during the lift checklist, those things that I'm thinking about as I'm conducting the lift. The example today is going to be the deadlift. This is a pretty simple lift in terms of a during the lift checklist, and generally the checklist that you have during the lift should be pretty simple, because with a heavy weight on your back or in your hands, it's going to be hard to think about 10, 12, however many bullet points during the lift, these little wickets that you've got to hit to make sure the lift goes correctly. So here, during the lift, I'm going to be thinking about the sequence of extension or flexion. That's going to be depending upon whether you're squatting, benching, deadlifting, overhead press. So for the deadlift, it's going to be the sequence of extension. So in this sequence of extension, I'm thinking about what muscles are extending the joints. So for like the bench press, it's the triceps that extends the elbow. It's the quadriceps for the leg that extends the knee, right? So you want to be asking yourself, what muscles are doing the movement? This is going to dictate the checklist, the order that you go through that checklist, right? There's a right and a wrong way to have a checklist. A lot of times these are by order of operation. So here, it all has to do with timing, the sequence. So with the deadlift, what muscles are doing the movement? The first one is going to be quads. So I'm going to be pushing through the floor. This is one thing that I tell my lifters, the people who I train, myself, push through the floor. So when you're deadlifting, don't think pick the weight up, rather think push through the floor. Now, the other part of my checklist is a second push. This is glutes. So the deadlift are two pushes. This is going to be my checklist. Push through the floor, push hips to the bar. Now in terms of the range of motion, I'm pushing through the floor up to my knees. Then, once the bar crosses my knees, I'm going to push my hips to the bar. So this is going to be above knee. In this during the lift checklist, it's going to be imperative that you practice this with light weights, because then it becomes second nature. When it comes to heavy weights, these two things, these two pushes that are dependent upon two different triggers in that range of motion, the bottom of my knees and then right above the knees, those two things you can refine with light weights, and then it becomes automatic at the heavy weights. So really, the only 2 points I have in my checklist for the deadlift is just quads and glutes. Everything up before I initiate that lift, that's the pre-lift checklist. During the lift though, thinking about two things. These two muscles, quads and glutes, what they do, muscles doing the movement, and that's extending the knee, extending the hip, and that's going to get me to lock out. Now, to make things a little bit more complicated, but not too much, at lockout, glutes and abs. Those abs are just going to help me stand upright. They're going to be already flexed and tense during the initiation of the lift, during the pre-lift checklist, but I like to emphasize abs as I'm coming up, I'm standing up from lockout, that my hands are coming up my thighs. I'm just gonna squeeze my abs even harder, because what I don't wanna have happen is that my ribs are down and I can't get my shoulders back and actually lock out a deadlift. You don't wanna miss a deadlift just because you had weak abs and you couldn't pull yourself all the way up to standing straight up. So here, just to add a little extra thing, glutes and then abs. It's one right after the other. Glutes and then abs. So this is my during the lift checklist for the deadlift. Don't make yours too complicated, whether it's for bench press, squat, press, whatever lift it is that you're working on. I like to have a checklist for all of my main movements, squat, bench, deadlift, overhead press. Those accessory movements, maybe not so much, perhaps front squat or maybe an RDL just to train that glutes and abs lockout portion. The RDL is great for training that. And generally, this is where you can use the T2 and the T3 to work on those muscles that are doing the movement. If you're doing an RDL, you can train your glutes pretty effectively and make that automatic. So that's why you want to build out your T2 and your T3 to support those main lifts, and then you can help refine that checklist using those accessory movements, and it will come second nature a lot faster than you might think. Start developing your checklist and you're going to see your lifts just get so much more consistent. You're going to be able to become a technician on the platform, not get a red light, and it's just going to be smooth sailing. Well, everyone, that was the during the lift checklist. Make sure when you're developing your own checklist for during the lift, it has fewer items on it than the pre-lift checklist. The pre-lift checklist is everything that you do up to that point to make sure that the lift starts right. The during the lift checklist is making sure that the lift goes right as you're doing it. So make sure that you're not including too much stuff, because under a heavy load, you're probably going to forget something. Also, with those lighter weights, it's going to be easier to remember those things as you practice. So when you're doing something like a deadlift, consider your accessory movements as an opportunity to practice specific points in that checklist. For example, the Romanian deadlift, working on my glutes and my abs, the second point in my pre-lift checklist. If I were to use paused deadlifts or deficit deadlifts as an accessory movement, I can work on that first point, my quads, getting that bar to break up off the ground. So just keep these things in mind, developing your own checklist. It should be to whatever particular lift. They don't have to be standardized across all lifts. They might resemble one another. Maybe squat and bench have similarities because they start with an eccentric phase. Likewise with press and deadlift, they start with a concentric phase. So those pre-lift and during the lift checklists might look similar, but refine them, fine-tune them so that you can remember them and apply them specifically to those individual lifts. Doing so is going to make you more consistent in the weight room, more consistent on the platform, and then overall you're going to get stronger a lot faster because there's just far fewer variables to be worrying about when you're doing a lift. So this has been a video, the second part in a series of checklists. I encourage you to develop a pre-lift and a during lift checklist. If you got questions about this, drop them in the comments boxes below. If you got suggestions for other videos, put those in the comments boxes below. Just like to invite everyone to come to Alma's Gym, the highest gym in North America. And thanks for watching the video. I hope you like it. Please like, share, and subscribe.